friends. This episode of Foggy Oak Fairy Tales is not scary in a spooky sense, but is definitely scary if you are a pumpkin farmer. It is the true story of a rainstorm that hit at exactly the wrong time and washed all the pumpkins away from the neighboring farm and on to everything downstream, including Foggy Oak Farm. Join me to learn about that, hopefully once-in-a-lifetime flood. The Great Pumpkin Flood, as we have come to call it, happened a decade ago in September 2015 when we were still pretty new to Foggy Oak Farm. A huge storm had rolled in the night before and kept up a relentless downpour until the early morning hours. We had certainly had heavy rains before, but this was truly unusual in both duration and volume. While you might not appreciate it if you have to walk up our driveway, during these kinds of storms, we feel very lucky that most of the farm, including our house, is at the top of a pretty significant hill. So when we got up that morning to get ourselves ready for work and take our oldest daughter to daycare, we didn't have a real sense for how much water had come down. We went about our business as usual, loaded everyone into the car, and then made our way down the hill, at which point David and I gritted our teeth in a mutual, horrified grimace as we began to take in the extent of the storm damage. Our gravel driveway had nearly been washed away. There were huge ruts and gashes and pits everywhere, some as deep as 6 inches, worn down to reveal the bedrock of the hill. We could make it down the driveway in our car, just barely, but we knew we weren't going to be getting deliveries up to our house until this was fixed. Still, the driveway had been washed away before, and while a hassle, it could be rebuilt. It was the bottom of the driveway that immediately became of greater and more perplexing concern. Because, you see, as we exited the tunnel of trees leading down the driveway and came out onto the flat open area at the bottom, we saw that the stream that runs under the beginning of our driveway had flooded. Not only had it washed over and out of its banks, it was almost reaching up to the driveway itself, which is a good 5 or 6 feet higher than usual. Maybe we should turn around, I wondered to David. What if it totally overflows and we can't get back up to our house? I think it'll be okay, David replied. There's just a lot of volume right now. That was when we noticed the pumpkins. Not a lot of them, just a few, gently bobbing down the overflowing stream. That can't be good, we both said at once. We knew our neighbor up the road had a gigantic pumpkin patch that supplied many of the local grocery and big box stores. A rain like this could really mess up his ability to load and distribute the pumpkins, with the farm roads and pumpkin fields now a mucky, sucking, dragging mess. Clearly, some pumpkins had already escaped, which seemed like it could be a problem. It was a bigger problem than we had any inkling of at that point. We made it into town, daycare drop-offs, and our respective offices before the rain started up again. At first, it was just a drizzle, but it quickly built into another fierce storm. I was heading into a meeting when our neighbor across the street texted me. The entire street is underwater, and I thought you should know that there is a huge flood of pumpkins built up against your fence. They already burst through at the neighbors. She sent a picture of the road. It was indeed underwater. She had captured a few cars trying to navigate it, floodwaters reaching up almost to their windows. As a side note, never do this. It is incredibly dangerous. Not only can it ruin your car, it can get you killed. This is how cars get swept away with people trapped inside. Do not drive through floodwaters. We all know this. It's easy to make a bad decision in the moment. Just a PSA for everybody who's going through flood season right now. Don't do it. Don't drive through floodwaters. Anyway, of course, I worried about being able to get home and about the neighbors on the road who were making extremely questionable decisions to try and drive through that mess, but I suddenly had a horrified vision of a cascade of pumpkins pushing and straining and piling up and up and up against the very old and very rickety fence that stretched across the stream between us and our neighbor. What would happen when the fence broke? Which it surely would. I texted our pumpkin farming neighbor to see if he was aware that his pumpkins were escaping and if things were okay. Friends, he knew, and things were not great. As it turns out, the rain had come at precisely the wrong day. The day before, his pumpkin harvesting team had swept through all the fields and cut the stems of the pumpkins from their vines. This is a long process since each stem has to be cut by hand, and it took them all day to move across the fields, releasing the pumpkins so that they could then be collected. Gathering the cut pumpkins was supposed to happen this day, today, but the storm had come in the night. The overnight storm had already washed acres and acres of pumpkins away from their resting places. The collection crew had not been able to even get to work because of the flooding, and now we had all the rain of the morning on top of the night before. Hundreds, maybe thousands of pumpkins that had already been washed further and further away from their field were now rolling their way into the normally shallow, barely moving creek at the edge of his property. But that normally gentle stream was the same as the one at the base of our driveway. It had swollen and spread, and was even more rushing and roiling and gushing up by his pumpkin patch. And so the rain and mud and wind slowly, inexorably pushed and slid and rolled all those newly freed pumpkins towards the stream. And the stream gobbled them up and rushed them along, bobbling and swirling them away and right towards us. Inevitably, the fence across our part of the stream could only hold for so long. It gave way under the force and the pressure, suddenly releasing hundreds of jammed pumpkins further downstream. My across-the-street neighbor texted me again. "The pumpkins broke through, but they're starting to clog up your culvert pipe." Well, that made sense. The pipe that ran the stream under our driveway was big, but it wasn't big enough to take the force of hundreds and hundreds of pumpkins all at once. Well, why would anyone put in a culvert pipe that could take the force of hundreds and hundreds of pumpkins all at once? It's not a very typical use case. There was nothing we could do about it, so I tried to see the humor in it. I was in a meeting at the time and tried to explain to my colleagues that my driveway was currently under attack from a gigantic, truly gigantic flood of pumpkins, which no one could believe. "They're really stuck," my phone dinged with the update from my neighbor. I finally gave up. There was no way I could focus at work with the pumpkin logjam situation. David and I met up, picked my daughter up from daycare, and made our way home. That took about an hour, and by the time we made it home, the rain had stopped again. The road, while wet, was no longer flooded, and miraculously, the pumpkin log jam in the drainage pipe had simply resolved itself, or at least as far as I know, it resolved itself. The whole floodplain of the stream by our driveway was absolutely covered in pumpkins, but the driveway and the drainage pipes themselves were somehow okay. The fence was indeed absolutely splintered and busted out about halfway down. The pumpkins had truly done it in spectacular fashion, but that was a minor quibble, all things considered. We let our farmer neighbor know that many of his pumpkins had found their way to our farm and counted ourselves lucky that the great pumpkin flood seemed to be over. When we drove down to leave for work the next morning, we happened to run into a couple of teenagers who were driving a truck absolutely piled to the brim with pumpkins. They had been sent by our neighbor to gather the escaped pumpkins all along the stream from his house to wherever the great pumpkin flood had taken them. They were just finishing up gathering the ones at our farm and were starting to drive off when we came down the driveway. Once they headed off to gather from the next part of the stream, the floodplain of our area was pumpkin-free again. And in fact, you would never know it had happened at all. our pumpkin farming neighbor soon invested in additional fencing along the edges of his pumpkin pastures and added new fence posts and a lot of sturdy boards in more areas across the stream. I don't know that the universe would ever conspire so perfectly again to produce the situation that led to the Great Pumpkin Flood, but if it ever did, he's done everything he can to be ready for it. And that, friends, was the Great Pumpkin Flood of 2015. It's hard to believe it's been a whole decade, but it is still one of the strangest experiences we've had at Foggy Oak Farm. And honestly, probably just across the span of my life. A pumpkin flood is pretty unusual. I hope that you're enjoying spooky season and have enjoyed this year's Foggy Oak Scary Tales, even if this particular one was not so very scary. Happy Halloween, happy fall, and may none of us be swept away in a pumpkin flood. See you next time.